Hi everyone, so the Hex Scatter node for Blender is now available. It was a collaboration project between Chris and myself, Chris being a valued member of the Blender community and just an excellent shader whiz. I did a video for this a little while ago, kind of showing you how you can make any kind of texture into a seamless semi-procedural material, as I call it. I use the term semi-procedural because it's kind of a combination between regular procedural material techniques and more traditional texture sources. A lot of people were impressed with the results, but there were also some questions. So in this video, now that it's available, I'm just going to show you what the file contains, how to use it to make your own materials, just so you can get your hands on it, and we'll go from there. And for the first 2 weeks of release, I'll also put a 15% discount up as well. So if you're early, then you can get that. And also if you're signed up as a patron when this video goes out, then you can claim an extra discount. So let's get into it. When you open the Hex Scatter file packaged in with the product is currently only available on Gumroad, by the way, so you won't find it on Blender Market. It might go up there in the future, but because this is a collab project and Chris doesn't have a Blender Market account, we have to do it on Gumroad for now. But when you open the file, you're going to see something a bit like this, and maybe it's a bit messy, but I'm going to run you through it, so don't feel too overwhelmed. So obviously we've got the 3D view here with a sphere that has a material applied, and of course this material is composed using the Hex Scatter nodes. Below it there's also a bit of a README file, which you can have a look through, a little image editor here to preview some of the textures in the file. This is quite important because in the process of making materials, you're going to be importing images into the file to then assign them to node groups. It's a slightly different way of making materials than the regular way of doing it, but again, I'll go into that. In the bottom left, we have two text editors, and these both have their own scripts in them. So these are convenient scripts to help with making the materials, because when we're doing the Hex Scatter method and doing all these creative things like height blending, it requires multiple instances of the same textures to be referenced. And for the most complex versions of these nodes, for example, the Preamble Triplanar Hex Splat material node group, assigning the textures multiple times is quite annoying and a bit of a time sink. So I made a couple of scripts to help with that. One of them helps you assign textures to the node groups, and the other one helps you refresh the textures, meaning that if you're, say, on another monitor working on the texture and making changes, then you can quickly flick back over to Blender and update the textures just by running the script. The reason you need to do this is because with the way I've got things set up in this file, when you're importing textures to turn into these materials, they are pre-packaged in the blend file by default. What I mean is if we go to File, External Data, and automatically pack resources, you can see that's ticked. And the reason why I leave this ticked is because if you're making materials and you want to recycle them in other projects and you're moving the file around your project workspace, you don't want it to break the links with texture files where the directories may no longer be valid. So when it comes to making assets like this, I think it's always better just to pre-package the textures, even if it makes the file a bit larger. With that in mind, what you're seeing with this file is effectively a tool that I've made, again with the help of Chris, to compose my own materials. These are scripts that I will use to make the process easier for me. This is the method I will use to make materials for future products. And just before we go further and I show you the actual process, I should let you know that there is a license on this product. Again, you're not allowed to repackage and resell the node groups, though individual techniques in this product aren't necessarily new to the CG space. A lot of this stuff has been done before. This particular combination of methods and the way we've done it is something that Chris came up with under their own intuition, and the purpose of its creation was specifically to help me make my future products. So though whatever you make using these node groups is yours to do with as you please in your own projects, you cannot then resell them if they contain the node groups. Only Chris and I can do that, and whoever we give permission to. But anyway, let's get into it. As for the actual Hex Scatter node groups, you'll see that there's quite a variety of options, because when it comes to A, making textures seamless, and B, projecting them around objects, there are several different methods you can go for, and we had trouble trying to pick just one that was appropriate. For example, if you have an image that you want to make seamless, like a grass texture that has a very obvious pattern when you scatter it on the ground, you could just do some dithering, like noise dithering, white noise, and blur the edges, add a bit of random rotation and scale, and then say, hey, that's seamless. And in some cases that works perfectly fine. So we have some dithering modes of the Hex Splat method available. If we see up here, Triplanar Hex Splat Dithered. So what this does is it does the hexagonal tiles and then dithers the edges and then does the triplanar projection. Let's actually take a look at this. If I copy this material, or node group rather, bring it over here, I'm going to make a principled BSDF, going to make another material output. I'm just going to do this separately from over here so you can see what it looks like a bit more clearly. And then let's say I take an image texture and I'm going to give it an image just my fingerprints. So it's basically just this image here. then obviously if I connect the image color to the printer board and then that to the surface, it's rubbish on its own. Doesn't really do much. It's just trying to project one texture around this subdivided cube, and we've got some very obvious seams. If I then plug the vector into this and then turn the scale down, you can see this is pretty much the simplest possible method that we have in the pack for making something seamless. So I've turned the scale down. I can then add some random rotation, which is going to do something important. You'll notice that with triplanar projection, there are some mirrored areas. If you up the rotation, it will go some way in resolving that. Not completely, but definitely helps. Then we've got some scale random as well. And you have control over how much the cells blend. And you can see the very obvious dithering method. So again, the absolute simplest thing we have available. You'll notice that there's two different blending values, one for the cells, so these are the hexagonal cells, and then one for the triplanar mapping as well, because these both produce seams in different areas. But if you're buying the Hex Scatter pack, that's probably not what you're going to use this for. Maybe it is. Maybe you're going for some simpler artistic use cases and you just want basic dithering. That's perfectly fine. But that's not what got people excited in the original announcement video. What actually got people excited was the triplanar hex splat material. So what you'll notice here is that there are two types of node groups that have very similar names: TP hex splat image and TP hex splat material. The material versions are a step up in complexity because this is where we bring in the height blending method. This is far more advanced than just regular dithering because it adds some logic to the blending process between seams. So I'm going to copy this node group and bring that over. But given its added complexity, it's slightly more confusing to use than a simple node like the TP hex splat divid, because we can't just plug a vector value into an image. Instead, the images are kind of pre-baked inside of the node group. So just to demonstrate this to you, I don't need an image texture node. I can just straight away plug the color in and the normal, and then if I get like a displacement node, I can plug the height into that, and then let's turn down the scale, obviously. And then we end up with something more complex. So what's happening in this version of the blending is we are effectively blending the height values between cells. So we can see that here as I scrub up and down the height value, you can start to see where those seams are, and then the height bleeds into each other. It's almost like averaging out the values like a mudslide between the higher and lower regions. We also have the option for color smoothing to go along with this, because if you're blending things in accordance to the height data, if you're then blending the color data on top of that, you can get some really harsh fall-offs. So color smoothing helps to just soften that a bit. As you can see where we've got these harsh areas, then I can increase the color smoothing to blend that out. And again, just like the earlier dithering, these values are available for the triplanar mapping as well, because likewise, the triplanar projection is going to produce seams of its own, so we can blend the height on those. This is actually a really good area to see that as a demonstration, and then to blend out the color afterwards. So that raises the question, if there's no image texture node, then how do we choose which images it's going to scatter? Well, in the case of this file, there is a node group called material, and material is what the material versions of the nodes reference. Basically, anything inside of this node group is what's going to get scattered. So as we can see inside of material, we have an image texture node for every type of map that we can use. So there's color, AO, metallic, roughness, height, normal map, and custom data. So you would effectively just go into material and then swap out the image texture nodes with whatever textures you like. So I can demonstrate that for you. I just clear out these annotations. I'll just save the file so I can come back to where we are. And I'm going to change the color for a scraping texture. I don't actually use the AO. You can use the AO if you like. I don't usually use it. I just stick with color, height, and normal. But you've got the full PBR workflow here if you like. So I'm going to go to height and add the scrape height. And then I'm going to go to normal map and add the scrape normals. And I'm going to make sure that color space is set to non-color for normal, just so we get that right. So now basically I have chosen different maps, and now we can continue playing with different parameters and creating our new material. Now, obviously, depending on what kinds of textures you're using, different values would be more or less appropriate. And then you can recycle texture content to add more effects as well. So you could always use other procedural nodes like ambient occlusion to darken the spaces in between the geometry that's generated for displacement. You can also change the seed values here to randomize things, and the normal strength, of course. That is a very quick demonstration of how you would make your own texture using the TP hex splat material node and the material node group, which is basically a convenience node group to assign all of the texture maps to the material versions. So then some of you will ask a question here, which is, if the textures are contained inside of one node group, that means you can only have one material in the blend file using this method. What if you want to have many materials using the TP hex splat material mode? Because after all, this is the most powerful one in the pack. So this is where things get slightly more complicated. complicated. We wouldn't need to do this if Blender allowed for image input sockets in the shader editor for node groups like it does in geometry nodes. But as far as I understand, that's quite a complex thing to add. There is a solution for this which allows you to have many materials using this method inside of a single blend file, and it's what I've created called the Preamble Groups. So what the Preamble Groups mean is if we look inside, pretty much all of the logic in the node groups has been split up, so it's far less easy to read now. All logic done before any images are referenced is stored beforehand here. That's what I call the preamble. And then any logic that comes after images are referenced is here, which I call the postamble. So I basically destroyed Chris's node groups, made them far more difficult to read, just for the sake of exposing all the images in one line like this. So what this effectively means is if I duplicate this node group and then make a copy of it, I can name it anything I like new material, and then I can go into it and then change every single image texture reference to whatever new textures I like. So the node group itself becomes the new material. And then we can do this as many times as we like. So I'll make another version, new material 2, go into the node group, assign all the image textures, and then we've got another one. So obviously this is quite a heavy way of doing things. You can do it X number of times. You can end up with hundreds of special materials all using this hex scatter method. But the real annoying part about it is just assigning all the image textures. And you could totally do that yourself. In fact, I was doing that quite early on in this process just to test having a file with multiple materials. But this is why I've made the convenience scripts which come with the file, so that when you are constructing your own materials with these node groups, it's a lot easier to do and it's a lot faster. So I'm going to reset the file quickly back to how I had it a minute ago. So this is like our backup point, and I'm going to take the preamble TP hexsplat material, and I'm going to again take that other scrape texture set that I showed earlier and turn that into a new material in this file, so we can have both the original fingerprint material and the scrape in one file. I get this may be confusing for people that haven't done more advanced shader editor and node group type stuff, but this is quite an important aspect of the product because this is how we will effectively be able to compose asset libraries full of scattered materials using this more complex method. Like I said, I've taken the preamble version and I'm going to make it unique by clicking on the number to the right of the name, and I'm going to name this just scrape. So this will be our scrape material, or maybe I'll make it more obvious and do scrape clay or something like that. Now I'm going to import all of the image textures I want to use into this blend file. So I'm going to go to image, open. I'm going to go to the right folder that has all of my textures that I want to use. So I've just pasted that directory in, and you can see I've got my scrape AO, color, height, normal, and roughness. Like I said, I only really use height, color, and normal, but you could use all of them if you like. So I will just import all of them for the sake of it and press open image. We can now see that all of the scrape textures have been added to this Blender file. So now it's just a matter of taking the images and then having them auto assign into each of the image texture references in this node group, this specific node group. The way we do this is by coming down to the map replacer script. Now, the script is longer than what you can see, right? Only by a little bit, but by default, I've got it scrolled down to the relevant area where you can see these variable definitions. Under node group name, you want to change material to the name of the node group. So hover over the text editor and type scrape clay. Quite self-explanatory. We're just saying to the script we want to replace the image references in this node group and none of the others, because this is the material we're building. Now, the next variable called texture dict, meaning texture dictionary, basically says to Blender, wherever we see a color image texture, we want to replace it with the following image. So if I go into the node group, you can see there are a few different color image textures here, and we want to assign whatever the name of the image we give here to that image texture. So because I imported scrape one color, that's what I'm going to put here. So scrape one color. Same thing with height again. I've got scrape one height. So I'm going to do scrape one height. And then scrape one normal. Now you'll notice I've only got color, height, and normal here, and there are other maps. So yes, if you wanted to do AO, for example, I would just put a comma here and then do in parentheses AO, colon, and then my quotation marks again. I'll do scrape one AO.png because that's the name of the image in the file. And again, if I go down, what else have we got? We've got like a roughness in this one as well. So roughness colon scrape one roughness.png. So you just have to associate the name of the image texture node with the first value in the dictionary there. Now, to make this more obvious, before I run this script to replace all the texture references, I'm going to plug it in to our principled BSDF, so we should be able to see when the change happens. Now, by default, obviously because I duplicated this node group from the Preamble TP hexplat, it's just got the default fingers texture assigned. So if I now go down to map replacer, just going to save this quickly, and then run, you'll see that in the 3D view, it has now changed the textures to the ones which I defined here. So what that's done is it saved me many minutes of work by going through each of these, looking to see if any of these image textures are the same type as what I've defined in the dictionary, and then assigned their textures to be what I defined in our script. So if I open up like the roughness node here, you can see it says scrape one roughness instead of fingers one roughness. That's great. So effectively what we've just done here is made a new seamless, infinitely repeating clay scrape material with a lot of random control that's powered by height blending instead of just regular dithering or any other generic noise blending. This is effectively the process for making new materials with this method. Now for the map refresh script, this one is a bit simpler. So you'll see that there's a line here that says reload images in node group, and then it's got material being the name. Of course, we do the same thing again. We just replace this with the name of our group. So scrape clay. Now, if I made any modifications to the original files I had imported, say if I take scrape one color, and outside of Blender I'm just going to modify it quickly, but I'll make a quick backup of that. Let's open Affinity. So let me just deface this. Obviously there's no reason to do this other than just for demonstration. And I'm going to export it, and I'm going to overwrite scrape one color. So obviously I've overwritten that image, but because we imported the image into Blender before it was defaced, we've got the old version. So now if I run this map refresh script, and after going into solid mode and then back into rendered view, which forces a reload of the loaded images, you will see that the defaced mark has now appeared on our material. Obviously having a line going like this through the image texture is not really ideal, you know, it's not realistic, maybe it's artistic, but funnily enough, it gives us an interesting demonstration of seeing how some of the blending actually works. If I scrub the height blending values back and forth now, you can see that despite the color data, we can see that the height blending is not linear as such. It is smart in the way that it's kind of averaging between the high and low values where the height data is, and then the color data just kind of has to deal with that. But as a result of that, we get some interesting effects. So though, yes, this is great for making realistic materials that have ambiguous sources, things like ceramics, clays, stone, grass, etc., that aren't necessarily structurally sound, but we'll take a look at tiles and stuff in a minute. We can still use this as something stylistic and artistically creative, which is something I want to look into as well when I've done demonstrations with my like artistic collages and stuff in the past. So now if I undo this change in Affinity and export this back to the color material, run the script by clicking the play button or by hovering over the text editor and pressing Alt and P, you'll see it update there in the blend file, and we just need to go back to solid view and then rendered view, and it'll be back to normal. So from here, if you wanted to make an asset library full of these complex scattered materials, you could just hover over the name of the node group here, right click and press mark as asset. If you then open up an asset browser window, oh, here's some stuff from my Afterglow product. If you go to current file, unassigned, you'll see that the node group is here, and then you could always redrag that in to any shader editor workspace. But remember again, this product is licensed, so you can't redistribute the actual node groups. So this is only for your own usage or usage within your company if you purchase a product for like client projects and stuff like that. So a question I got quite a lot on the previous video was, what about bricks and tiles? And because obviously when we're using ambiguous sources like clay materials, random rotations and stuff are what kind of sell the illusion of it being kind of infinitely seamless. And the answer is obviously yes, it's better with ambiguous textures, but it can also work with tiled images. It will just kind of mush them quite a bit. So I can do a demonstration for you. Let me just get an extra plane here, and I'm going to duplicate this node group and make it unique, and I'm going to call it wood. Then I'm going to import a color and height texture. So the color is just this, which I made in preparation for this video. You can see it's got some like plywood looking stuff going on and some borders. And then the height is just white and black, as simple as it can get. I'm going to set up this script. So for the node group name, I've put wood, color, one color, because that's the name of the texture map, height, one height, and I can get rid of the other references there. So I'm going to run that and then plug this in. So color, normal, and height. And then before we carry on, I'm just going to assign the same material to the plane so we can see what this looks like. So when using highly structured things like a wood texture like this, we need to think about things a bit differently. First of all, you're very unlikely to use random rotation with this. Also, I should unplug the normal value because we're still getting that from the scrape texture. Then because the color is definitely not seamless and it's actually darker on one side, we are most likely going to have to up the height blending between the cells to try and average out that light value, and likewise maybe do the same thing on the triplanar a little bit. But you can obviously see that the markings for the borders don't line up properly because that's what happens when we're doing triplanar projections and random positions and such. Now we can modify the scale random to try and line them up, or just not even try at all and keep it on a basic value. And what you get with something tiled is basically just a mush like this. But the thing is, whereas you would use the scattered clay materials as like a hero material, as I would call it, something that you would be quite comfortable with seeing up close on the camera, I don't think that tiled image materials being hex splatted are useless. I just think they're better as background materials because they're still useful in the way that they apply to any object of any shape, and depending on your perspective, you will still see texture detail and displacements where it can give them to an appropriate degree. I think in this way, they still have some artistic merit. You just need to play around and see if you can find any applications for them. Something like this. I've just rotated the position to something around 50 degrees, and I think on a planar surface that looks quite interesting. Also, for the sake of it, I just quickly added some ambient occlusion and increased the subdivision quality for adaptive subdivision in the subdivision surface modifier. That's a mouthful. And this depends on like the amount of geometry being generated, but again, you can still get some interesting effects. So hopefully that answers that question, but let's take a step back and take a look at something else. So there's still more to explore. I'm not going to go over every single option for every single node in this video because I've got to try and keep it condensed. And we'll probably go over this more in the future as well because I'm going to keep going back to this. As well as the TP versions of nodes, there's also BP versions. So TP is triplanar and BP is biplanar. What this means is it requires fewer image samples to project the image around an object. It's a clever technique for recycling data. What it means is that some areas of the projection may seem a little bit more pinched than others. So now I've got the triplanar color plugged into the principled BSDF, only the color, nothing else, and I'm going to swap it for the biplanar version. Now look carefully at the 3D view and see if you can notice anything different about the map. Did you notice that? So back to triplanar. You only see it very slightly around the seams here. If I go back to biplanar, there's just a very slight increase in pinching. So for a trade-off of fewer image samples being used, there is a bit more pinching. Now to compare the number of image samples, this is what the preamble version of the triplanar material blending looks like. So we've got a complex set of 3, and if we go to the biplanar, there are fewer image samples required. Now there is a lot more that you can do with this node group, and there are lots of demonstrations I can show you in the future, but I just wanted to get this video out because we finished this product like a couple of weeks ago, and because I've been moving, can you tell, into a very special new place, I haven't been able to record this until I finally got the computer set up again. So like I said, there is a discount on this, 15% off by using the code on the screen, or check the pinned comment or the description. Go and grab Hex Scatter now on Gumroad. It's a very powerful tool, and if you want to learn a bit more about it, you can check out the previous video because you might prefer that demonstration of it to this. Otherwise, if you made it this far through the video, feel free to let me know in the comments by putting a unicorn emoji. It's a tradition we have on this channel. But yeah, check it out, pick it up. You'll be supporting both me and Chris, and also future development projects for the Blender community. So thanks for watching, have a great day, and I will see you next time.